press the infamous record button, which means we're now recording. Share screen. Well, it's a pleasure and a delight to have Mr. Andrew Wainwright with us for another one of these eccentric sessions. Welcome to the collective.
Hi, Morvin. How you doing?
I'm good. Bit fraught. It's a Friday afternoon here at the moment, so I'm looking forward to the weekend and just sort of catching up with family. But this has been in the schedule, in the diary for a while, and I wanted to talk to you about your career and composition, and I'm really glad we've managed to get things working. So
yeah,
I know from various things I've read that your career is just something that's just gone all over the world, and the Salvation Army is a part of it. I know you've lived in many different places, but apart from that, I mean, I've met you at Chicago concerts and so forth, so we're not complete strangers.
No.
But apart from that, and having seen your website and your list of music that I've got, what's the story behind the music? Do you come from an army family, or do you come from, what's the story with the music in your family? What's your musical heritage?
Yes, so my parents are Salvation Army officers. They're now retired, living in Yorkshire. So really I've been involved in the Salvation Army my whole life, as long as I can remember. And I've been around music my whole life. So really as early as I can remember, there were brass band tapes back as they were back then, cassette tapes being played in the house, and maybe even records, LPs. I recall sort of listening to the Canadian Staff Band and the ISB in particular back then. And I say back then, I mean by the age of 2, we moved to Kenya till about age 6. I don't remember a whole lot about those years, obviously, because it's a long time ago. But from Kenya, we went to Zimbabwe, and we were there 5 years. So that's really where my earliest memories come from. And being part of the Salvation Army there, and they really love their music, I
was going to say, a bit of a vibrant thing. I mean, anyone
absolutely.
who's Zimbabwean dancing knows that it's not just a 2-minute thing. They'll go on for hours.
Absolutely. From morning till dusk. They'll be up singing and play their instruments. It's fantastic. So I really got the bug for music from an early age. And seeing these great Salvation Army bands marching down the street there, often with thousands of people, there really is a passion for it. So I guess that's sort of what stoked my interest to start with.
Yeah, I just find it interesting. We talk to people who have, in adulthood, like Nick Simmons-Smith and Nicholas Samuels, and they've moved to start a career. But as someone growing up, particularly in Zimbabwe and Kenya, and the Salvation Army being so passionate, going to England and then to America, how did that? Because was it a kind of, hang on a minute, you were so used to that kind of evolution of army worship and praise, coming to the UK and to the US must have been a kind of a sedate, kind of quiet experience.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite a culture shock. That's for sure, like very different expressions of worship, but, all very vibrant in their own different way, I guess. I mean, when we lived in Africa, we'd come back to the UK regularly. So even though I was sort of an African boy, the UK was also my home. We come back to visit family a couple of times a year. So, you'd still go to Salvation Army meetings and be involved in that when I came home. But yeah, I mean, having been back to Africa many times since, I think took for granted, that vibrant worship when I lived in the UK, like having been back again since, and just seeing it from a different perspective as an adult, really.
I just find it's incredibly interesting because I think there's not very many people who are composers and arrangers who have had that kind of eclectic cross-band thing, because they spend 5 years as part of a job, whereas you grew up there. So your childhood, your schooling, your friends was that vibrant thing, and then you keep swapping the thing. So as a child, you had to learn to adapt, I would guess, very quickly to the worshipping in a Salvation Army hall in the UK to one in Zimbabwe, then two in Chicago.
Yeah,
Sort of manipulate your thoughts as you're growing up.
Yeah, I mean, I count myself really fortunate to have grown up in that kind of environment. I realise not everyone gets to grow up in a place like that. Yeah. And also, you know, it was a good time to be in Zimbabwe, you know. Yeah. You know, the country was doing very well at that time, and the Salvation Army, I mean, the Salvation Army is still very strong, but I think they might have more Salvationists there than anywhere else in the world.
Yeah,
so
it holds the record for
that. So I count myself privileged to have had those years. It was 9 years in Africa altogether before moving back to the UK when I was 11.
Yeah. So, when did you find out what's your earliest memories of mucking around with notes on a page and then going, hang on a minute, other people outside can play this rather than just plinkety plonking around the piano or the harmonica or whatever, you know, mum and dad are doing at home? When did can you kind of remember when the first instance of how you became involved in working out, dissecting scores, that kind of thing happens, to the first time you were brave enough to say, guys, I've written this? And you know,
I can remember it pretty vividly. So the first time I ever wrote any notes down was actually in Zimbabwe. I was probably aged about 10 at that time. And we were on holiday in a place called the Eastern Highlands, so a very scenic sort of area. And we were staying in this hotel, I think over New Year. And there was a particular day when I was a bit bored, and my dad said, why don't you go and write some notes down, some musical notes? So I think we might have had a tune book there. I don't know why you take a tune book on holiday, but anyway.
You're an officer's kid, that's what they do.
True, yeah. Perhaps that's what we do. So I opened it up and found I'll Go in the Strength of the Lord, and actually jotted down the tune. So you couldn't call it composing or arranging even, but it was sort of...
learning
how to write manuscript. And then...
Just a little bit, can you remember why your father said to you, go and learn some... Go and put some notes on it. Oh, go and ride your bike. Go and, you know, ride your scooter or whatever. Right? Have was there kind of this, he's fiddling again, you know what, go and sit down and have a go, because this is the ideal time?
Yeah, I don't know really. I mean, my dad is passionate about Salvation Army music as well. He was the bandmaster at that time at the Harare City Corps where we soldiered. And it was also around the time of the Salvation Army's centenary there. So there were big celebrations, and General Eva Burrows came. And I remember Norman Beercroft actually coming and leading a music school.
That must have been when the Centenary March was written.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a bit of a story behind
that. A few times.
Yeah, and that sort of came about. Our family was sort of on holiday again. This was a different holiday, but walking down the beach, and I think I said to my dad, wouldn't it be great if Norman Beercroft wrote a march for this centenary? So fortunately he knew him, so he was able to get in contact and say, hey, my son's had this idea, would you put this together? So we actually went to the Salvation Army Training College with a tape recorder and got the cadets to actually sing these songs that Norman could include in this piece. So I guess that's my claim to fame. So it's sort of my fault.
Just out of curiosity, anyone who wants to confirm this story, I was actually in a massed band, Ipswich Citadel, when Norman Beercroft came and told the story. And
really?
That is available on YouTube.
Yeah.
So the commissioner sent through some tapes. He said, I had no idea of these tunes, but for anyone who wants to see this video and hear the cassette tape of the tunes, it is on YouTube.
Yeah, amazing.
Yeah.
I'll have to look that up.
So your father says, here's some paper, you copy out In the Strength of the Lord. And how long was it before you sort of make a serious study and you're thinking, hey, I'm enjoying doing this. This makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, it probably wasn't for a couple of years really that I started to delve into arranging and composing. It was after moving back to the UK at age 11. So it's probably a year or two after that. And I remember my first like serious arrangement would have been a praise band song, actually, Shine Jesus Shine.
Mm-hmm.
So it had piano, guitars, drums, and also some brass in it. So I wrote this thing, and that fortunately I was at Bromley Corps at the time, Bromley Temple.
Yeah.
So we had a group that could play, and I think they played it on a Sunday morning, possibly in one of the meetings. But I was fortunate to spend some time with Robert Redhead, and this was sort of the piece I showed him. So I think my parents wrote to him at IHQ, and he was head of music ministries there. I don't know what it would have been called back then, but he was bandmaster of the ISB.
Yeah.
So you can imagine sort of getting a reply as a 11 or 12-year-old to say, hey, why don't you come and see me? So I remember sort of going up to YHQ as this young sort of 11, 12-year-old and knocking on the ISB bandmaster's door. Hey, I've got this piece.
Wow.
Yeah, you can imagine the trepidation. I mean, that was a real big thing for me at that time.
Yeah.
So I spent maybe an hour with him, and he was really encouraging. Robert's a great encourager. You know, I've had the privilege of sort of being at music camps with him in years since, and always found him a great encourager. But so he gave me some real good advice at that stage. So I went away and sort of made a few edits. Yeah, so that's where it all started, really. I also, Ray Bowes used to work in the same office as my dad at the old Judd Street.
Okay, yeah.
So my dad worked
the
in
old Judd
finance.
Street?
Yeah.
I remember it.
Yep. Which is where trade was. So my dad arranged for me to go and meet with Ray Bowes, sort of around that time as well. And by then I'd written this march, which he had a look at. I can't remember the name of it, but that was sort of my first brass band piece, I would say. And again, he offered a lot of good advice, and got to spend some valuable time with him. So,
bearing in mind that you are of a younger generation,
thank you.
is it still? Well, you're younger than me. I guess. I don't actually know, to be honest, but that's irrelevant. That bearing in my mind that how did you start in those days? Because computer technology was still way advanced by the 1990s, and you would have had access to even primitive form, or was it a case of pen and paper, and then when laptops and things came out, you could put down serious study and insert brand name here, notation software? Was it a case of pen and paper in the very early days when you were going to Ray Bowes and to Robert Redhead, and just latterly in your life, to get it onto Sibelius or Finale or whatever?
Yeah, it was very much pen and paper for quite a few years. I didn't get into music technology until sort of mid-20s probably, and publishing programs. And I'm glad I didn't, really, because I'm glad I learned sort of the traditional way how to write manuscript, and I still do that to this day. I still write first of all on manuscript paper and then go into the computer later.
Yeah. So what's the first time you can remember a piece of yours being played by a Salvation Army band or group?
It would probably have been Bromley Temple Band. And the bandmaster at that time was a gentleman by the name of Don Oliver, who's a New Zealander. So he and his family were at Bromley for a few years, and they're now back in New Zealand. But he was very encouraging. I'd written a couple of hymn tune arrangements. I think it was a hymn tune called Great Peter Street, or that was the name of the piece anyway. So I'd arranged this piece, and the senior band ran it down. So that was really encouraging, I think, just to be able to hear it for the first time.
Well, I mean, very moving experience. I mean, Bromley Temple has got one of the a reputation for being a really good, solid music section. So they wouldn't have been fazed by this, one of their own coming in and saying, "I've got just jotted things down. Yeah, come on, let's have a look at it."
Yeah.
Who are the other musical mentors in your life at the moment? I mean, you said you've got giants like Robert Redhead and Ray Bowes.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, your core section and people, musicians, would be your day to day, your week to week.
Yeah.
But are there any sort of names that really kind of spring to mind who you didn't think would take the time and care to say, come on, Andrew, let's have a look at this. Let's sit down at the piano. Let's go through it. Are there any kind of people that stand out in your memory?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, over the years, probably in my early 20s, Ray Steadman Allen, I was always grateful to be able to sit down with him, and I'd go into the music ministries department at THQ and show him a couple of my scores. So he always had a lot of good advice for me. Ken Downey as well has been associated with the department for quite a number of years. So great to be able to sit down with him, and he's another real encourager. Kevin Norbury, I remember, was at a music school probably in my teens actually. Yeah. He would be another one, and then more latterly Bill Himes and Jim Curnow, more since moving to the US.
Yeah.
I mean, I've learned so much from them, just showing them scores, and I mean they're always teaching.
Yeah.
It's a masterclass just talking to them. So even sort of half an hour with them, you come out a different person. It's like, whoa.
You come out with something more to add to your toolbox, kind of thing.
Yeah, you do. Yeah.
So, I mean, when you talk about this ongoing education, of course, you say you're not finished yet and you're still eager to learn, as any composer is. But are there any kind of real kind of firework moments in your mind where you had kind of what's the word I'm looking for? A kind of monument kind of stages where you felt you learned something really important that has helped you along the way? Sort of a signpost moment that lit up. Do you know what? I remember that.
Yeah, good question. There's probably a few. I mean, one that springs to mind more recently. I mean, it's more recency bias, but if you went back in time, I'm sure there'd be others. But speaking to Bill Himes not that long ago, he looked at one of my pieces and felt it was a bit too busy. There was too much going on in the score. So I had a lot of ideas, like a lot of young composers do, and I wanted to get them all in this one piece. So he said, you need to lighten this up a bit, take this out here. And actually, if you take something out, usually less is more. So you'll find it, if you take one particular instrument out, then another will shine a bit more, So I think that was very good advice. So since then, I've tried to simplify a bit more and make things more accessible, I would say. Yeah, and there's been, bits of information along the way, I guess, but that would definitely be one that has made a real difference to me.
Looking at your website, it's very easy to understand that you are not solely a brass band composer, and you do a lot of cross band orchestral and all the rest of it. So was that a transition that sort of came naturally from someone who only sort of, I listen to a lot of things, but from a composer point of view, jotting down, I'll go in the strength of the Lord, to doing a symphony for strings and a clarinet in an orchestral situation is, can be one end of the spectrum to the other. So how did you find the transition? Was it something that was interesting or not?
Very much. I mean, largely I grew up writing for brass band, and I thought I would just be a brass band composer for a while, because you grow up in the Salvation Army, and that's where the opportunity is, and also with contesting bands. So it's only sort of later on, maybe in my late 20s, I looked to sort of diversify, and a lot of these things come through opportunity. I wasn't just going to sit down and write an orchestral piece just for the sake of it, because who would perform it? But it came through opportunity with a group called the Elgin Symphony Orchestra in Chicago, and I got to know their conductor a bit since being there. And they have this series of Christmas concerts every year that called I think they're holiday favorites or something. So he said, could you write a piece for that? So I'd already written this piece called Christmas Fantasia for brass band. And what I realized after transcribing it is actually an orchestral piece that I wrote for brass band first. Like it just it just suited the orchestra better, I thought. And I could hear the different sounds of the violins and the oboes that just made sense. So I arranged that for orchestra with choir and added sort of SATB parts because they were going to have this choir there. And fortunately, I was able to go along and listen, and it actually sounded as I hoped it would. You know, that being the first time I'd written for orchestra, you just never know how it's going to translate, what the balance is going to be like. But generally, it seemed to work. So it's become sort of an annual trend, and had that opportunity for about the last 5 years to write a piece or two for them every Christmas.
Yeah.
So it really is one of my favourite projects of the year.
Yeah. And interesting to ask about Christmas, because I think a lot of, I mean, having, playing at Ronnie Temple and playing in Zimbabwe and in the US, Christmas carol concerts can be very traditional with a capital T. And the idea of approaching it with, and you, particularly in the UK, I mean, I can only speak from UK experience, that, you could literally, as the old saying goes, play the same 6 songs, not necessarily in the same order every other year. And you've got this challenge to write something new. So how do you give the freshness to a Christmas piece, knowing that some people will only be happy once they've sung the first Noel away in a Major Silent Night, and that kind of makes Christmas, and you want to kind of still maintain the specialness of Christmas? How do you approach that as a composer?
Well, I think there's a lot of great material out there at Christmas that gets overlooked.
Absolutely.
And I mean, I'm a big fan of listening to the Carols from Kings every year, and listening out for new songs and maybe songs or carols I hadn't heard before as well, like from the past. And there's some real gems in there sometimes that I felt, wow, that would really translate well for a brass band. And that's not to neglect the old favourites like "Oh Come All You Faithful," "The Heart, the Herald." They're great carols as well. But so I tended to veer towards arranging maybe lesser known carols to give something fresh. Occasionally I've done things with "Joy to the World" as well, because there's been requests for that. But like I did a piece, "Fanfare for Joy," a couple of years ago that was a commission, and that combined "Joy to the World" and the first Noel, but I gave it sort of a Celtic feel to it, just something a bit different there.
Does your exposure to international music make it easier if you have a request come in? I mean, I'm really what I think of is Norman's classic story of, I got the tunes on the tape and 3 of them I had no idea of what they were, and I just had to put them in and hope that they were the right tempo and the right pace. I hadn't mutilated them. So you have this benefit of internationalism. So does that help when you get a commission for a cornet solo or whatever, or an oboe solo, if there is such a thing, based on tune? Well, hang on, I've actually got no idea how this tune goes. I'm not familiar at all. But I'll have a crack at it. How do you handle that kind of thing when the tune is completely unfamiliar to you?
Yeah, I mean, I do think you're a product of everything you listen to. So I think the internationalism helps. And a lot of the time you'll arrange something and it will sound a bit like something else, but you don't know where it came from. It's just subconscious.
That was your end, because it wasn't mine.
Yeah, that was mine. Sorry, I don't know what that was popping up. Yeah. But I mean, like, to answer your question, if someone wants you to arrange a piece that you've never heard before, I think you've really got to get inside it and listen a good few times, maybe listen to a few different versions. And then sort of ideas start to pop up. What could I do with this? What kind of angle could I give this song? And leave it for a few days in the subconscious, and then maybe ideas start to flow when you're going for a walk or whatever, doing something else. That's often when ideas come along. And sometimes someone will come to you with a song that you wouldn't generally arrange if you had the choice. And I will try and do it generally if I can, but sometimes I'll say, hey, how about this song instead? I think this will work a bit better. Like, for instance, if there's a song where there's not much sort of in the way of harmony or harmonic progressions, where there's not a lot going on in that respect, and you think, well, what can I really do with this? So occasionally I'll say, perhaps we should look at another song. But generally, I'll try and arrange what they ask me to.
What is your beginning process? I mean, if the tune is presented to you and you say, I don't know, it's Cum Ronda, then it's already very well known tune. Is it? Do you still literally say, okay, let's get the pencil and paper out, sketch it out, and then when you've got something solid, you can put it on and sort of hear the harmonies being tidied up in absolute perfection on the software? How does the progression start for you?
Yeah, I mean, it can vary. Generally, I'll play the piece on the piano, the original material, and I'll listen to a couple of versions of it possibly. And then I'll start to experiment on the piano, looking through the tune, finding various motifs. What can I do with them? Sometimes I could turn it upside down, or I could lengthen it or shorten it in terms of rhythm, augmentation or diminution, those kind of techniques. And very often the introduction for a piece will come out of that. Like, it may not be the first few bars of the song. It might be something later on in the material, like a small motif of 3 or 4 notes. And it may not be exactly the same notes or the same intervals. It might be just sort of a representation of that. Yeah. Starting a piece is what I find the hardest, and I think a lot of composers would say the same. Like having that blank paper in front of you is intimidating.
Is that intimidating because you've got to start from blank, or does the knowledge that you've got a well-known tune or not well, that's got to be in it? Is that a help, or is that still kind of, oh golly, I've got to start from scratch, but you've still got to include Cum Ronda, St. Denio, Mark Good or whatever? Does that still present itself?
I think it helps having some starting material like that. That definitely gives you ideas. And that's where it's different to composing, because you've got to come up with something original. I've written a few original pieces where ideas have just come to mind and I've jotted them down. Yeah. But yeah, definitely having like a hymn tune would help in that respect, in getting started. And the thing is, like, we all start as beginners every time we have a blank page. Like, there's no guarantee this piece is going to work or it's going to be any good. Mm-hmm. You just got to trust in your ability and trust in God to give you the ideas, really. Yeah. And then hopefully they start to flow.
Yeah. How do you clean the musical palette? Because we've got music at us 24/7 from all angles, from when you get in the mall, radio, in the car. You don't want to be intentionally cloning Dvorak's Fifth Symphony when you've heard it in the mall, when you've got to try and approach it. What do you do to clean your musical palette when you've got to sit down and do that orchestral arrange? You've got to do that solo. Even if you know what the tune is or you don't, you've got, okay, blank slate, I've got to clean out the brain. What's your process for that?
I try and listen to as wide a variety of music as possible. So I probably listen to more orchestral music than anything else, but if I'm writing a brass band piece, I will listen to orchestral and jazz and even pop music and worship music, and because there's so many things you can bring into a band piece from outside. And likewise, if you're writing for orchestra, I wouldn't just listen to orchestra. I'd listen to various other genres. And then you get this sort of eclectic mix coming in, so you're not just confined to, you don't just want to sound, if you're writing for a brass band, you don't just want to sound like a brass band composer like all the others, Yeah.
There is a golden rule that the writing of the piece no way conforms to when it gets published, because some things get written many years before they end up on the published page. And your hymn tune arrangement of Hendon is 2004, but I was reminded of that wonderful arrangement of The Lord Bless You and Keep You, which I think really sprouted wings and took off. But when were you aware that sort of became bigger than that simple hymn tune arrangement? I mean, what was that a commission? Was it something you wanted to do? What's the story behind that? And when did you know that it had sort of taken on a life because of the beauty of the piece itself?
Oh, thanks. You're talking about Hendon?
No, Lord Bless You and Keep You.
Sorry, Lord Bless You and Keep You. Yeah. That would have been arranged when I was at Hendon, actually, towards the end of my time. Sorry? 2016
is the publishing date.
Oh, okay, yeah. It was written well before that.
Yeah.
Maybe 10 years before that. So actually, I wasn't really aware of it getting played a whole lot. When I was at Kettering later, at the Choir at Kettering, the band did play it. a few times. So it was great to hear it come to life there. And then it got published by Experianza, who are sadly no longer in operation. They were headed up by David Chalk, who sadly passed away about 18 months ago. And he put a lot of energy into this Experianza company and published that among with a few of my other pieces. So it's starting to get out there as a result of that, I think. And so I'm sure a few bands have played it. But yeah, I haven't heard too much about the piece since, really.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because when I was looking on YouTube for links and music that you've written, it came up, and I remember thinking, you know, there's a lot of people who said there's that simplistic kind of benedictory thing that's just is suitable for a prayeral thing, and it's not jazzy and horrible, but it's kind of what I was. It's like Len Valentine would say, it just is what you intend it to be. And I think, like I was saying to Darren Shaw the other day, Guardian of My Soul, very much the same ilk, that it kind of just got taken off and used because it's not, you don't need a PhD in astrophysics to understand it. Simplicity of the words is reflected in the simplicity of your arrangement.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So, and, you know, obviously you want it to be played. You don't want to play music that, obviously you have pieces of music that are designed for the big Royal Albert Hall kind of Carnegie Hall things, and the big symphony and the big concerts, but I guess you would also much prefer to write the functional pieces that you'll know get played by YP bands, small ensembles, and they'll get played regularly.
Very much,
that's what you know, you want the Lord to hear, kind of. There's no point in a piece of music that's just going to sit on the shelf.
Yeah, and I think as Salvation Army arrangers and composers, you're doing something wrong if all you're writing for is a staff band, you know. Like if you don't have a piece that can be used on a Sunday morning, a simple setting, then you need to write something like that, you know. And that, you know, the Lord bless you and keep you would certainly fit into that category, as would Hendon, you know, music that blesses people. And it doesn't have to have a lot of notes, but something that people can, you know, prayerfully reflect on. You know, that can mean a lot more than a flashy piece that gives a standing ovation, you know.
Yeah. I think it was the Day of Victory's Coming. In the AIES, I heard, and I've been listening to a lot because it's just sort of coming online in the past few years or so, that very kind of simple based things depending on which part of the series you're writing for. And I thought that was quite zany in its thing, because you're taking a very old hymn tune, and you almost, for some of them hymn tunes, it's got to be pedestrian because that's the level of the band and the kids and the level of the music score that you're writing for. And you kind of go on a circus trip with that, I find.
It is quite quirky.
That's the word I was looking for, quirky.
Yeah. It's not typically the route I go, but sometimes, as I was saying earlier, like when you play around on the piano, certain ideas come along, and I was just sort of experimenting and thought, oh, you know, that could work. And it's sort of I guess Bruce Broughton-esque a little bit. His approach. He probably wouldn't like me saying that, but it's not in that league. But that sort of style, you know. And not everyone's going to appreciate that, I don't think. Like,
I think it's
setting a well-known song like that. But
yeah. I think one of the most famous ones I know of from your thing is your Candlelight Carol.
Oh yeah.
And it's just like the Lord Bless You and Keep. I think just bands pick that up. I mean, I've heard a few outside bands play it. How did that come into being? Because I think it's a again, another Christmas piece, but it's almost, you know, a special one in its own way, as it's not just another arrangement of Away in a Manger. Yeah. But of a very original piece in itself. What's the history behind it?
I mean, I've been a fan of John Rutter's music for as long as I can remember. And it might have been hearing it at Carols from Kings again. That, you know, there's just something magical about that carol, I think, along with a lot of John Rutter's music. And sometimes you'll hear a song and think, oh yeah, that would work well for a brass band, that would translate nicely. And I think I was at Hendon at the time, and David Dawes was in the band back then. So I think I had a conversation with him and said, you know, what do you think about this song arranged for cornet? So he was on board with it, and He was really good in playing it with the band as well. Obviously made a beautiful job of it, as he always does. But that's how it started off. And then that was another one that sat there for quite a while. And then I got a message from Andrew Bly to say, we'd like to publish this arrangement. So I was sort of blown away by that.
Really?
And then it's taken on a
Then
life of its
it's
own.
a beautiful piece. And
Thanks.
yeah. One of the things I do remember, there's a couple of pieces I would like to ask you about specifically, because doing these interviews, I get, unless anyone says, oh, ask him. I said, which I haven't actually had for a while, but I think they've just been so gobsmacked and happy with the zany questions that I've been asking. But Illuminate. Can you illuminate me, please? And pun absolutely intended.
Yeah.
On the compositional story. And I know for the life of me, there's a tune in there, and I love listening to it. I can't remember what it's called now. But can you sort of give us the story behind Illuminate, please?
Yeah, so it came about when I was playing with the Chicago staff band. I had this idea to write this piece. And one of the people who was organising, it was connected with the Boundless International Congress, 2015. Yep. So my boss was actually organising one of the events there. So we ended up having a conversation about writing a potential piece for the Chicago staff band for that occasion. And I was looking for things that would fit the theme, and this just came to mind, Illuminate, and what songs could I find that would fit that theme, and Shine on Us was definitely one of them, Michael W. Smith.
Yep.
And then Speak, O Lord, also the words speak about light in this dark world. And then The World for God as well, which I thought was fitting.
Yeah, very much so.
So that's in there briefly in the slow section. So that was one of the pieces that Bill Himes was very helpful with. So I sat down with him and went through it, and he had some great advice for sort of sharpening things up. So I learned a great deal from that process. So the band came over to the UK and brought it with them and played it a couple of times on that tour, including at the International Congress. The funny thing was, the piece was played at the Congress towards the end of the meeting. So a lot of people thought the meeting had finished and it was sort of the benediction. so half the congregation sort of got up and left.
Did it?
Didn't hear it.
So. Not good.
Yeah. So.
I think the last piece the Chicago staff band played was All That I Am, was one of Bill Himes's final bandmaster before you retired.
That was a very special occasion because it was basically Bill's last event with the band after so many years.
Yeah.
So I think someone in the band decided let's stay behind after the meeting and just play this tribute to Bill, and he conducted. So a lot of people came and gathered around the band, and it was a really special moment actually.
I was going to ask you, do you get to conduct your pieces very? I mean, in Chicago staff band, you obviously got some very talented people in there, and you've now got Harold Bergmager and all the rest of it. But even at a core level and a divisional level, how often do you get the chance to be offered the baton for your own pieces? Is it something you enjoy doing, or do you just let me get behind the instrument and play?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I get asked more regularly than I used to, and I didn't really start conducting until really my mid-20s, and it was one of those things I never aspired to do it, but sort of got thrown into it somehow, maybe at a music school or something, got a bit of experience there. And the more I've done it, the more I've enjoyed it and had more and more opportunities. So it does come up more and more often. I do enjoy it. I would say I probably prefer playing still.
Okay.
But I'm always happy to do it if I'm asked. Yeah.
Yeah. It's not one of the original questions on the sheet, but it came up with a lot of composers will put their sheet on expecting not to just blurt through. They said, no, come on, you conduct it. And obviously playing your piece is a very different experience to having to lead the band, especially when the bandmaster's going to go, okay, you need a bit of critique, as the famous James Kernow would have said. So do you find it a helpful experience to conduct your pieces, or something that's sort of embryonic stage, that's not maybe necessarily finished, to be able to sort of help you, guide you in the process? I'll get my teeth on in a minute.
Yeah, I think it does help. you know, that you can get inside the band, and when you get the chance to rehearse it as well, you can hear certain things, and perhaps go back then and make some edits. Like a lot of the time, maybe the balance isn't quite as you imagined, so you'll hear things. So I think it is informative to be able to do that and have the chance to get in front of a band. There are other ways where it's not as helpful, because unless they're a band that's particularly good at sight reading, most bands are only seeing it for the first time. They're not familiar with the music or the interpretation or anything like that. So it needs a good few run-throughs before it starts sounding as you would want it to.
Mm-hmm.
So there have been times I've gone away and thought, oh, that didn't really work, when it was really just a case of the band sight reading it. And actually, if they had the chance to rehearse it a few times, it would have been a lot better. And bands tend to play things without dynamics the first time. A lot of the time it's just sort of forte all the way through, so you don't get a fair representation of the piece. Of course, when you're conducting, you can bring that out of them a bit more. Like you do have the power to say, hey, can we just hear this piano?
One thing I was surprised at was your, I hope I've got this right, variations on Vazlebet.
Yeah, I think that's how you pronounce it.
Now, again, it's not a tune that I would have naturally put in a variational thing. But how did you end up doing a very beautiful piece? I do love a good variation, and it's interesting that you took that tune, because I think there's variations on Jubilee. You've got the Ken Downey 400 million versions, and we say that with the utmost respect, Mr. Downey. It's a Judge Street collection one as well from last year, where it published. How did you click onto doing a variational piece rather than just a hymn tune arrangement?
I think for a while I'd had in my mind to write a set of variations because I felt it would suit my compositional style. So I think it was in there somewhere, just hadn't sort of had the chance to get it out. So it wasn't a piece that I wrote for any occasion or any particular band. I just wanted to write it. So the benefit of that was I could take as long as I wanted, and the whole thing took the best part of a year, with sort of a break in between of a couple of months where I was just too busy doing other things. But that was helpful to be able to come back and just take my time and discard a few ideas. And if I went down a route I didn't want to go down, I could just say, forget that, and I'll start again on this particular movement and do something different. But it's a hymn that I've always been familiar with, I think, and I think it's a really strong tune. There's just something about the harmony in it. Those strong German chorales. And listening through a few times, I felt there was a lot you could do with it. There's a lot of motifs there that you can pull out. So I use sort of different aspects of the tune as you go along. You never hear the full tune until the end. So it's 12 or 13 minutes of music, but you don't hear the tune until 2 minutes from the end, you know.
How do you discipline yourself as I'll say composer, that when you have a piece of music or you get a tune or an idea, and it's not really a case of hymn tune arrangement, cornet solo, oboe solo. The sky's the limit as far as what you can do with the tune, and you just kind of, let's develop the jazzy, let's develop the quirky, let's develop the harmonics. How do you discipline yourself to say, okay, it could explode into a 12-minute epic thing, or do you know what, this could be for the core band for the annual spring concert? How do you find the discipline for controlling the firework impulse when there can be no need to control it?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you start a piece, you need to know A, who you're writing it for, and B, sort of the length. If you're gonna start a piece, you need to know it's going to be a set of variations before you start, and that it's going to have X amount of movements, and I'm going to aim for roughly this length for it to fit proportionally. But I mean, you're saying about sort of letting go. I think there were times in the piece where I did let go, and I felt I can do this here. Like my mind was exploding with ideas, and let's just get them out. And that makes the music more difficult at times, more challenging. So obviously that means that only certain bands could probably play it realistically. But I think you just have to run with that and accept it's going to be that type of piece. It's not going to be a piece that's going to be played on a Sunday morning necessarily.
Do you ever find that you as you said, you previously said, you go off on a tangent, you know, I don't want that, that's not suing, and then you find that particular section of music works well for something completely different?
Yeah, it can do. Yeah.
Yeah.
And sometimes you just put it aside and yeah, it turns into something else maybe. It happens occasionally.
And what's the, bearing in mind that you know you have a website with a whole range of compositions, and very interesting and very rewarding to see that. We have an international world of music available to us. Is it a surprise to you now if you get a Romanian band, say we played a Candlelight Carol, or a New Zealand, I know, oboe quintet says we played this piece of music? Or do you still get surprised? But do you know what? I never thought I'd hear that come from there. Is there anything unusual that springs to mind?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's always surprising when you hear from someone on the other side of the world that's been playing your music, and it's always a blessing to hear that. Like there was, I think it's actually going back to, I did 2 arrangements of The Lord Bless You and Keep You, by the way. One was the Rutten, one was the Luckin. And it was a Luckin version. There was a girl in Norway who I met at a music camp some years ago, and she said that, you know, this piece has really blessed me, and my grandma died recently, and it was played at her funeral. So that, you know, that really meant a lot to find that out. So you know, and it may not always be the pieces that you think, you know, might bless people, or pieces that you've forgotten about, you know, that you wrote years ago that are still speaking to people. It's quite an amazing thing, and I think it brings people together. That's part of what I love about this whole compositional thing, is that, you know, we're one big network that brings people together, and, you know, making music like that. So I'm always really pleased to hear from people and blessed to know that my music is being played.
So if you decided tomorrow morning to wake up and to take that job in the bus station, and composition was something that you didn't do again, and we know it's not going to happen, is there a particular piece of music that comes back to haunt you and just say, yeah, that's, you know, that's taken life, I'm going to be known for that for the rest of my life?
Probably earlier on, there would be a few pieces that I wouldn't want people to hear. Fortunately, they're not published, and there's a reason for it.
But is there a piece of music out there that comes back to haunt you? It's the most prolific piece of music that you get comments on.
I mean, The Day of Victory's Coming is one that isn't my favourite, actually, the one you mentioned earlier.
Okay.
Yeah, funnily enough, it's one of my least favourite ones that I've written, I think. And one or two people have said, "Oh, that was a bit weird." So, okay, can't win them all.
No, it's interesting. So, I mean, what I would like to ask now is, you've done Zimbabwe, you've done Bromley, you're now in the Chicago staff band. How did that journey commence? How did you find yourself in the benches of the Chicago staff band?
Yeah, so for a while I'd been interested in a move to the US. I'd been to a couple of summer camps out here, and I, you know, I like the people and the lifestyle and the Salvation Army. So this job came up in Milwaukee as the divisional music director. Probably 6 or 7 years ago now. I saw it advertised, so I thought, oh, I'll apply, see how it goes. And then I ended up getting the job and moving over, and it happens to be quite close to Chicago. So I live sort of 45 minutes from where the CSB rehearse. It was a few months before I was able to join, because you can't just obviously show up and join. You know, you've got to audition and go through the process and wait for a vacancy. But a vacancy came up on E-flat bass, which I'd never played in my life. So Bill said, "Oh, you know, it's not that much different from euphonium. You'll be fine."
You're an E-flat bass player.
So I went along for this audition, and he handed me this E-flat bass, and I played this exercise and a tune or something, and he said, "Yeah, that'll be fine. You know,
Oh golly,
you're in the band." So I had to learn this thing, and I was on E-flat bass for about a year, and then sort of got to move to my favourite instrument, euphonium, after that, and I spent another year on euphonium. But it was a really great time, you know. And and being sort of Bill's last couple of years, that made it extra special as well to be part of that legacy.
Is it strange when you do international, being as you've got this internationalism in your family? So, you come back to, you're playing with the Chicago staff band and you come back to the UK or you go to Zimbabwe or whatever. Is it a case of people sort of come up to you and say, oh, yeah, I grew up with you. And you're like, hang on a minute, Chicago, Bromley. How does, do your American colleagues rib you about that?
Not really, but I mean, it is nice when you go back to places and see people you haven't seen for a number of years. And people do pop up that you haven't seen for 20 years or so. Like we were over with the Southern Territorial Band a couple of years ago in England.
Yeah.
And I think we met then as well. But, we went to Boscombe and a couple of other places, Maidenhead, I think, and Stone
I don't think you suffered from the ice cream fiasco in Chelmsford, did you?
No.
You're all right on that one.
No, I know what you're talking about. Yeah, I was ill, actually. Most of the band were ill. Yeah.
Yes. Too much ice cream.
Yeah.
I think Sam's head in shame on that one.
Yeah. I think sort of 3/4 of the band were ill, but somehow we managed to carry on with our festivals,
Yeah.
There was one concert I played in where I had the hiccups all the way through. But luckily, I mean, I was playing second horn, so when you're playing offbeats, you can sort of hiccup in between the notes, so that worked quite well.
Lots of water backwards, best way.
Yeah, but there were, it was good to see people on that trip I hadn't seen for a long time. People from my time at Hendon, people from Bromley, Kettering, and even from Zimbabwe. I've often caught up with people in the UK who I've known from back then, all those years ago.
Bearing in mind that we are in a very weird time zone, and part of the reason of these interviews is to allow people to sort of share fellowship in whatever way we can. Has this allowed the compositional thing to sort of increase its wings a bit, or has it been a case of family, friends, shopping has come first? What's in the background on the compositional bench at the moment?
Well, we got a 6-month-old boy, Harry. So he's occupying a lot of my time at the moment, which is great. So I have him during the day, and then my wife Laura has him in the evening, and that's generally when I get to work in the evening, apart from when he's asleep, which is less and less regularly. So overall, I still have about the same amount of time to write as I did. I've got to be honest, it's a little bit harder to have the motivation to write with all this going on, and not knowing the next time any music's going to be played, or when bands are going to get together again. But I keep saying to myself, I've really got to make this happen. I've got to sit down and actively try and compose here and make the use of the time. I mean, there aren't many days when I don't compose. Like, I feel like I'm wasting time if I'm not composing.
So what do you do when when you've got to put the composing aside because you've got to allow the juices to settle? What else do you like to do? I mean, if you could have the ability to go out tomorrow and do something interesting without the curfew and without that lockdown, what would walking the dogs, reading, going to the library? What would it?
I mean, I love sport, so I love playing football. I play in a league here once a week, so that started up again, but I've decided not to play for the time being because of the virus. I enjoy going for walks, so go out for a walk or two every day with Harry. That's often where the ideas flow. I enjoy graphic design, so CD cover designs and posters and all that kind of stuff. So that's sort of what I do aside from composition. And if I'm not in the mood to write a new piece of music, I'll often go and arrange a current piece of mine for wind band, let's say. Really? So I'm actually working on a piece at the moment that I wrote for brass band, for wind band, and sometimes for orchestra as well. So because I think it requires a bit less creativity to do that. Like I'm not saying it doesn't require thought, because it does, but you don't have to come up with original ideas. So sometimes if the ideas aren't flowing, I'll go and do that, and then I feel I'm actually doing something constructive still.
You like to keep constructive. You're not someone who's happy to sit on the sofa twiddling his fingers watching the late night movie.
No.
You're happy to sort of keep active.
Yeah, I mean, I limit myself to sort of 1 hour of TV at the end of the day. Once I've done everything I need to do, And I should add also having a practice. I try and get that in a few times a week. Playing my baritone, that's hard as well at the moment with no bands to play with. So
yeah,
you've got to be disciplined to keep that up, as I'm sure a lot of people are finding.
Yeah, I do remember we had an elderly bandsman at Ipswich who went into hospital and had to have his legs amputated.
Oh yeah.
And he was obviously housebound for a number of times. And when he received the doctor's permission to go back to band practice, he said, I've been keeping my instrument out every day and just having a blow to try and get. And some people said that's more than some of us doing a whole week.
Yeah.
It was very much a case of there was not much he could do, and he was reliant on everyone else getting out, having lost his mobility. So it's very interesting to be able to. I can't quite do that on the drums at the moment. I don't have a bass drum here, but
right.
I have to bear in mind the neighbours. But
you're going to keep your lip in at least.
The story, that's a different story altogether. Favorite Salvation Army song that currently on the brain, because I know it changes from spring to summer, day to the week, depending on what you're listening to. But is there anything particular at the moment that you keep going back to, or find yourself going, yeah, that's the current one on the player?
Yeah, I mean it changes a lot, and often it will be a song that I'm arranging at a particular time. So one I'm arranging in a piece at the moment is "God and God Alone," which is a beautiful song, and I was sort of reminded of it by the ISS, one of their online videos recently, and that's a song that really speaks to me. So I decided to put that in a piece that's coming up, and one that always stays with me is "All That I Am," Bill Himes. Just the words always speak to me and mean a lot to me. So that's a personal favorite, I would say. And actually, I used that piece in a wedding processional that I wrote.
Oh, really?
That's one of the songs in the wedding processional.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So, who else do you like in the in orchestral? I mean, who other music do you enjoy listening to? I mean, are there any composers either no longer with us, or that, you know, if the music comes on the stand, whether at core level or with the Chicago staff band or whatever, that you think, I'm going to enjoy this, whether you've played it before, whether it's a new piece?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot, again, to pin it down to a few. I mean, brass band wise, anything by Eric Ball, Stedman Allen, I think, just amazing music, like these masterpieces that they've gifted to us. And then more recently, Peter Graham, for sure. I mean, there's so many. Bill Himes is another, of course. Jim Kerno. And then sort of beyond that, in the orchestral world, I've been doing a lot of listening to orchestral music recently with the Berlin Philharmonic website, where they were giving us a free month. But I continued subscribing because there's just so much good material on there. But so I made it a thing really to get to know as much music as I didn't as I could, that I didn't already know. But I mean, my piece at the moment is Brahms's Fourth Symphony. I don't know if you've heard that, but what he does with those motifs, especially the first movement, that is particularly special. So I enjoyed listening to Bernstein's sort of critique of it and talking through the analysis of how he put this together. That was pretty incredible. And then the Mahler symphonies, I've been trying to get through those, especially his first symphony. There's just something about that. I love Debussy's music. Stravinsky. I mean, there's so many. But certainly Brahms and Mahler at the moment. They're sort of my favourite of the month.
So, favourite Bible text? Do you have one?
Jeremiah 29:11. For I know the plans that God has for me. I think that speaks to me the most. Yeah.
So, it's been, very interesting because, you go from Hendon to Variation on Was a Bit. I mean, I've got things like Life of Worship, Texas Celebration, The Risen King in the repertoire that haven't been are not officially on the published list. I was going to ask you about Piers, but we'll save that for another day. it's been absolutely fascinating to hear and to talk to you about all these different pieces, and very much learn from the internationalism that, you know, you're not just a boy that grew up in the outskirts of Bromley. You've had a very eclectic childhood. So we just say thank you for giving your time and for agreeing to join in with this.
Oh, my pleasure.
I'll just say a prayer and we'll go from there. Dear Lord, it's yet again an absolute pleasure and privilege to talk to someone who, in Andrew, has just a very keen awareness of you as Lord. And I think that it's very evident from his music that his upbringing is not just rooted in Bromley Temple or Chicago, but those seeds that you specifically planted in him just molded him into this person you wanted him to be. And we thank you for that, Lord. We thank you that his willingness to follow you, his willingness to keep pushing himself to make bigger and better things, and also to go entirely the other way, that there is a sense of functionality, and that not every piece has to be played in Carnegie Hall and it's just the local town hall with 3 kids on a recorder, but the same beauty and the same love and care and attention as them. We thank you for that, Lord. I thank you for his compositional skills. I thank you for the ministry of music that has been embedded in him by you, and that he seeks to glorify you in all that he does. And that also that stretches to the orchestral world and the secular world, that you don't stop at the door of the secular band and the secular concert and leave the Christian behind you. That's a part of who he is. And I pray for all the people that come into contact with him that will really see the love for you that is embedded in him and that is so central to what Andrew does. And that as he continues his life with his family and his friends and his core life, that he will remember constantly that you are there guiding him, providing him with opportunities, and that he can just use them and hopefully bring glory to you, Lord, as we all strive to do. So I just thank you for the compositional, the arrangement, gifting him the knowledge and the ability to use that in an effective way, Lord. And we thank you for that. And I just ask your love and best wishes and prayers, Lord, and the blessing of Jesus Christ and the Holy Spirit, as we've just celebrated the wonderful season of Pentecost, will continue to enhance, bless, guide, and also for those who come into contact with Andrew on a daily and weekly basis, that you will just bless them, Lord, through his music and through his Christian witness. I just bless him now, Lord, and ask you to keep him safe for the foreseeable future as he continues to serve you in the multifaceted ways that he is able to, Lord. But just now, Lord, we pray for him, his family, his friends, his parents, his siblings, cousins, whoever, that they are supporting each other as only you can in this world, Lord. Thank you, Lord. Amen.
Amen. Amen.